When you were a...
Like 15, 16?
Really?
Yeah.
Not intimidated, not scared?
Terrified.
Oh, you were?
Oh, God, yeah.
Because you always see...
What if one of the most iconic women in cinema, the assassin in a yellow jumpsuit, the muse behind Hollywood's most legendary scenes, was silently fighting for her life off camera? Not from stunts, but from the men who claimed to love her, protect her, direct her. Uma Thurman wasn't just betrayed, she was silenced, sidelined, and nearly broken by the very industry that made her a star. But she never disappeared. She was watching, remembering, and now she's speaking. Not through a role, not through a character, but as herself. And what she reveals will change how you see Hollywood forever. Anger often leaves behind regret, especially when expressed in the heat of betrayal. Uma Thurman's journey isn't simply one of cinematic glory. It's a tale woven with scars, betrayal, manipulation, and enduring strength. Not all wounds are inflicted by knives. Some come dressed in compliments, feigned admiration, and the manufactured charm of Hollywood grins. Uma Thurman, with her statuesque beauty and piercing gaze, became the epitome of cool allure in films like Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill. But beyond her icy, on-screen persona lies a woman shaped by emotional wounds and quiet suffering. For decades, she was used, dismissed, betrayed by colleagues, lovers, mentors, and even the directors she once trusted the most. This is the side of Uma not seen on camera. Not the assassin bride drenched in vengeance, but the real woman. Vulnerable, wounded, yet unbroken. 5 men stand out in her life, each leaving behind a scar deeper than the last. They weren't villains on screen, they were directors, lovers, producers, those who should have lifted her but instead tried to silence her. Born in 1970 into a family as intellectually rich as it was unconventional, Uma's upbringing was a complex mix of high culture and emotional distance. Her father, a respected Buddhist scholar, and her mother, a statuesque fashion model, raised her in an environment where intellect was prized and beauty scrutinized. From early on, Uma felt like a product, admired for her looks but isolated for her mind and height. This fierce individuality, however, would become both her armor and her burden. Her talent was undeniable. She rose quickly in Hollywood, delivering breakthrough performances in Dangerous Liaisons, Pulp Fiction, and Kill Bill. But behind her meteoric rise was a gauntlet of exploitation and emotional manipulation. One of her earliest traumas occurred on a film set when she was abruptly asked to perform a nude scene, surrounded by leering men and cameras, with no prior consent. Another time, a co-star kissed her without warning during a scene, and when she protested, the director insisted they keep it, calling it authentic. These moments weren't exceptions. They were routine reminders of the power imbalance in an industry cloaked in glamour. One of the most defining betrayals in Uma's life was at the hands of Quentin Tarantino, the director most associated with her legacy. In the early 2000s, during the filming of Kill Bill, Uma was coerced into driving an old, unstable car down a gravel road, despite expressing fear and concern. She was 6 weeks pregnant and terrified. Tarantino overruled her pleas, insisting the shot be captured without stunt assistance. The car crashed into a tree. Uma lost consciousness and suffered a serious spinal injury. Instead of halting production, Tarantino screamed for cameras to keep rolling. She later learned the footage was being withheld, allegedly due to technical issues. But she knew the truth. Her suffering had been captured, then buried to protect reputations. Tarantino's silence in the face of Harvey Weinstein's abuses added another layer of betrayal. Weinstein, the film mogul behind Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, was once Uma's biggest supporter. But in 1994, he invited her to a hotel room in London under the pretense of a business meeting. When she arrived, he was alone, wearing a bathrobe. He blocked the door, making aggressive advances. She managed to escape, but the punishment came later. Lost roles, professional isolation, and growing fear. While the world still saw her as a muse, she was internally unraveling. And Tarantino, once a confidant, said nothing. After her public split from Hollywood and the fallout of being discarded by men she once trusted, Uma Thurman did something rare in the entertainment world. She disappeared. Not in the dramatic sense of a scandal or retirement announcement, but in the quieter, more personal way people vanish when they need to heal in private. Her absence wasn't just professional, it was emotional. It was a protective exile from a world that had taken too much and left too little. Uma Thurman's story is not about vengeance, it's about evolution. For years, the world celebrated her icy elegance, her haunting stillness, her razor-sharp performances. But now, it's the woman behind the characters who commands the spotlight. Not because she demands it, but because she has earned it. Her pain, once hidden beneath red carpet smiles and stylized dialogue, is now her most powerful narrative. No longer a muse, no longer a symbol, Uma is simply herself. A woman who has endured systemic abuse, public heartbreak, and professional sabotage, and still stands tall, unbroken. Her story teaches us that surviving isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in stillness, in raising your children with love, in walking away from toxic glamour and reclaiming your name. Today, Uma isn't interested in revenge or retribution. What she wants is something far more radical in an industry built on control. Freedom. Freedom to speak, to age, to define beauty on her terms, and to create without compromise. She has shed the scripts others wrote for her. Now, finally, she is the author. And her story, raw, real, and unapologetically human, is only just beginning. She moved away from the flashing cameras and embraced a kind of quiet rebellion. She raised her children with care, shielding them from the same scrutiny that had consumed her. Friends say she spent days in the garden, painting with her daughter Maya, cooking homemade meals, and reading Buddhist texts her father once lectured on. These weren't glamorous acts, they were sacred ones. Survival for Uma wasn't just about moving forward, it was about reclaiming pieces of herself, long buried under scripts, spotlights, and betrayals. What few saw during those years were the private breakdowns, the therapy sessions, the rebuilding of trust in herself. After being gaslit by powerful men, belittled, humiliated, and sidelined, Uma began to question her worth, her instincts, her very voice. And that perhaps was the deepest cut of all. The emotional manipulation she endured wasn't always loud, it was subtle, strategic. Designed not to break her body, but her belief in her own reality. One therapist who worked with actresses from the Weinstein era later said, "What these women endured wasn't just assault, it was erasure. They were rewritten by men who had the power to decide what version of their truth was allowed to exist." That's why Uma's decision to speak publicly in 2017 wasn't just a courageous act, it was a revolutionary one. When she finally told the world about the abuse she endured at the hands of Weinstein, it wasn't just for catharsis, it was for history. Her testimony joined a wave of voices that cracked the carefully preserved facade of the industry, and her words, filled with calm fury and piercing detail, became a catalyst for accountability. Still, even as the world applauded her courage, some questioned the timing. Why now, they asked. But anyone who's lived with trauma knows there is no right moment. There is only the moment when your truth burns hotter than your fear. Uma didn't just accuse. She explained. She told how she was silenced, threatened, minimized, not just by the abuser himself, but by the systems that protected him. When she asked for the footage of her crash from Kill Bill, she was stonewalled. When she voiced her discomfort on set, she was told she was being difficult. And when she needed support, the men she considered friends vanished. But Uma's story also carries another message: that healing does not look like revenge. It looks like reclamation. She began returning to public life, not to promote a film or strike a red carpet pose, but to mentor, to speak, to reflect. She gave interviews not about fashion or gossip, but about survival, emotional intelligence, and the quiet violence of gaslighting. In one such interview, she said, "The worst thing about being hurt isn't the pain, it's how easily they convince you it didn't happen." That internal war between what you feel and what you're told to believe is one that many women in Hollywood have silently fought for decades. And Uma, once the face of stoic vengeance in films, became the face of something more powerful. Feminine resilience. Not performative rage, not Hollywood's version of empowerment, but real, messy, intelligent survival. The term muse haunted Uma for much of her career. In artistic circles, it's meant to be a compliment, a source of inspiration. But in Hollywood, it too often translates to beautiful object, someone to project fantasies onto, not someone whose inner world is honored. Directors like Tarantino use the term lavishly. Weinstein used it manipulatively, and others used it to excuse controlling behavior. For years, Uma played along. She wore the title like a costume, even if it never fit. But later, she began questioning it. In an intimate essay, she wrote, "A muse is meant to be seen, not heard. But I have a voice and it's no longer silent." In interviews, she dismantled the mythology around the roles she played. The vengeance-driven bride in Kill Bill, the enigmatic dancer in Pulp Fiction. She explained how those characters weren't just fictional. They were often inspired by the traumas she was actively enduring off-screen. This layering of reality and performance is something audiences rarely consider. Uma's power on-screen came not from stylized violence, but from her ability to channel something real. Every narrowed gaze, every clenched jaw, every pregnant pause, it was all drawn from the well of her lived experience. That's why her performances didn't just entertain, they haunted. The betrayal by her collaborators was, in that sense, even more insidious. They weren't just exploiting her image, they were mining her pain and packaging it as art. Uma, in her redefinition of what it means to be a muse, now insists, if you need to break a woman to make great art, it's not art. It's abuse disguised in prestige. One of the most overlooked dimensions of Uma's journey is her motherhood. While the world dissected her love life, her films, and her fashion choices, Uma was quietly raising 3 children. Her daughter, Maya Hawke, now a talented actress herself, has spoken openly about her admiration for her mother's grace under pressure. In interviews, Maya describes Uma as the strongest woman I know, someone who taught her the value of honesty over charm, self-respect over fame. In the midst of public divorces and professional blacklisting, Uma created a sanctuary at home, a space of emotional truth and fierce protection. She has said, "Hollywood made me feel disposable. Motherhood reminded me I was irreplaceable." This too was a form of rebellion. Hollywood rarely allows women to age on their own terms, let alone raise children without being painted as difficult or irrelevant. Uma defied that narrative. She didn't return to acting in a blaze of comeback headlines. She returned slowly, intentionally, only choosing roles that aligned with her values. Her choice to avoid the mother stereotype roles, overbearing, neurotic, or reduced to emotional support, was itself a statement. "I'm not here to play someone's emotional wallpaper," she once said. "I've played warriors and victims. Now I want to play the truth." Today, Uma Thurman is not defined by her past, but she does not deny it either. She walks through life with a kind of grounded stillness that only survivors understand. She speaks calmly, chooses her words with care, and doesn't perform strength. She lives it. She sits on advisory boards for women in film. She has begun mentoring young actresses, not just on the craft of acting, but on how to navigate power dynamics. She teaches them how to say no, how to read contracts, how to protect their body and voice. "It's not enough to tell girls to be strong," she says. "You have to teach them how the world might punish that strength and how to survive anyway." Her power now is not in the roles she takes, but in the legacy she is shaping. She is not rewriting her history, she is reclaiming it. What does it mean to live through betrayal and still speak with grace? To be silenced for decades, then return not with bitterness, but with clarity? It means you're no longer playing someone else's script. Uma Thurman's story is more than a Hollywood cautionary tale. It's a declaration of autonomy. It's proof that beauty, fame, and talent do not shield one from harm, but neither do they erase one's right to speak up. She is no longer the bride. She is the woman who lived, named her abusers, reclaimed her pain, and turned silence into power. And if there's one thing Uma Thurman's story proves, it's this. Even in an industry built on illusion, the truth always finds a way to speak. The second man to fracture Uma's world was Ethan Hawke. In the late 1990s, they were hailed as Hollywood's dream couple. She was the ice queen of indie cinema, and he, the soulful actor from Dead Poets Society. They married in 1998 and had a daughter, Maya. Uma stepped back from stardom to focus on family, pouring herself into love and motherhood. But that love was betrayed. In 2003, Uma discovered intimate messages between Ethan and the young nanny they had hired. Ethan had taken the nanny on a film tour without telling Uma. The betrayal cut deep. They divorced, but Ethan's response was not remorse, it was humiliation. At the 2004 Oscars, he arrived with his new girlfriend, who wore a white dress almost identical to Uma's wedding gown. On camera, he coldly remarked, "I need someone who doesn't live in the past." Uma didn't retaliate publicly. In a quiet interview later, she said, "People don't just steal your heart. They put it on display and dare the world to mock it." The pain wasn't just personal, it was public, politicized, and cruel. Then came Steve Bannon. Long before his notoriety in U.S. politics, Bannon was a Hollywood figure involved in financing and producing films. After her split from Ethan, Uma was eager for a creative resurgence. She signed on to a film backed by Bannon, hoping it would be her comeback. Instead, she walked into another trap. Bannon invited her to what was supposed to be a business dinner. There was no crew, no creative team, just Bannon, champagne, and manipulation. When she declined to visit his suite later that evening, he threatened her with chilling indifference. "You're not a queen anymore, you're just an investment." Within days, Uma was dropped from the project, her name scrubbed from posters, her contract canceled. Internal emails later revealed her blacklisting was deliberate, punishment for not submitting to his authority. Uma withdrew from the film industry for nearly 3 years afterward. She rejected roles, ignored offers, and nursed the wounds in private. In her own words, cinema stopped feeling like art. It became a meat market, hidden behind dialogue and costumes. When the Me Too movement erupted in 2017, Uma finally stepped forward. She named Harvey Weinstein as one of her abusers and described how silence had been her only protection. "I wasn't quiet because I wasn't hurt. I was quiet because I knew the price of speaking out was everything I had worked for." Her words echoed the pain of countless women, but her strength gave them a voice. The final betrayal came from a man she had once publicly adored, John Travolta. Their chemistry in Pulp Fiction was undeniable, and off-screen, the relationship blossomed. Travolta called Uma his goddess of light, and for a while she believed love had returned to her life. But love quickly turned into control. Travolta began dictating her wardrobe, demanding to screen her scripts, and isolating her from friends. One night, after she received flowers from a French director, Travolta silently shredded the bouquet in front of her. "I don't need you to be happy," he said. "I need you to belong to me." Uma ended the relationship, realizing she had once again become a prisoner. This time, not of a director or producer, but of a man who mistook obsession for love. Travolta later blamed her for not understanding real love. Uma's response was clear. "Love isn't possession. I am not a private exhibit in someone's fantasy." Today, at 55, Uma Thurman no longer needs to play roles to be heard. She is no longer the bride or a muse. She is a survivor, a truth teller, and a woman who has earned the right to define her own story. Her past is painful, yes, but it is hers, and she is no longer afraid to name the men who broke her silenced her, and tried to reduce her to a pawn in their games of power. This is not just a story of one woman. It is a reflection of an industry that has too often confused talent with obedience and power with permission. But Uma Thurman is done obeying, and she will never be silent again. Behind the red carpets and the cult classic films was a woman who endured more than most will ever know. Uma Thurman's story is not just about pain, it's about resilience, reclaiming power, and rewriting the ending on her own terms. Through betrayal, manipulation, and decades of silence, she rose not as a victim, but as a voice. And in doing so, she shattered the illusion that fame protects you. If her story moved you, let us know in the comments, because these are the stories that matter. Subscribe for more untold truths, more voices breaking through the silence.